See, Rick, I wasn't here, you didn't even know I wasn't here, so I'm not that important.
Now that you mention it, I do remember you not being sitting in front of me on there, but, you know, try to stay out of everybody's business.
Well, they were messing with me, they'd like my name up red and just take a picture out, and then I guess they changed it. So.
The PBF bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got some good work done yesterday.
Kind of go in today, 4?
4. Yeah. Well, burn a day.
Shouldn't be long with Calvin, hopefully.
How you doing, sir?
You gotta go home to do that?
Not good. Not soon.
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
How are y'all?
Good.
Morning.
Yeah, just get that tomorrow.
What town do you live in?
That's close. I don't really live in town, I live in the outskirts. They incorporate everything around it, they make taxes, and it's a grocery store, a lot of it, it's we in the county, right across the street, it was reached out and they threw everything, ready to be produced. We don't want to do this.
You go down to, that Pickens County below you? Old Tuscaloosa or what?
Hill County, directly green.
Green, one thing about. That's where catfish farms are.
Hill County. That's what catfish capital of Alabama.
Morning, sir.
How you doing? Well,
Good morning. Morning, sir. Oh, Rick. Morning, sir.
All right.
Good, how you?
Good.
You're a bill presenter today?
Yeah, I am.
Right. How you? We can do a few more, don't we? 2 more. 2 more? I left the house at 6 o'clock this morning, so I could be here. You are so. I had another word, but I'm glad you. If I miss 2 days, they're gonna take out my checks.
Oh, man, we can't have that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I get extra stopping penalties, man, you do too, right?
Absolutely.
How do we get moved down here?
It's just where we need to meet because of timing.
Yeah.
We moved it up because we're going in session at 4, and we're normal time is 4.
Yeah.
So we moved it up to 8:30, and hopefully we'll get a 4.
Anybody else respond? I guess I'm the only one responding to that text.
You're the only other one up yet.
I was at the office. I got final services at 9.
I do too, but
Yeah.
We'll stay here though, just, you know, if somebody says I'll be there in 10 minutes.
Yeah, we gotta go up to 6th floor for that one.
Sir?
Financial services, that's up on the 6th floor for that one at night.
and I got another bill I'm working on. I need to see. They got a quorum in there. I need to work on
Well, we're gonna have 2 more, there's 1.
Right.
We're getting close.
She can vote twice.
She's right on time.
Yeah, I went to Forward, I didn't look at the room number. I looked at the time, not the room number, so I
Well, the
went to
bad
the.
part is that Alicia and I
Other
discussed it at length, and then I almost went to the other one. When I left my office, I'm like, wait a minute, it's not there.
Well, they're all set up for, committee, I'm like, wait a second, these aren't the same people that are.
However, Richie is here.
Who else at the end? So it's not I'm not sure Debbie knows.
I think, did you say Debbie was in funeral?
She's sick.
Oh,
She's not gonna be here. I don't know about Matt.
there it is, 1, 2, 3, there you go, Alicia.
About Richie. Travis, you can't even get any of your Democratic cohorts to
So I
help
was
you
just
out.
looking at it, but I said, you know, they weren't raised on the farm.
So this means they don't do this now,
But
basically.
they don't get up, you know.
No, I mean on your bill, that's, they
No,
don't
no.
do it now.
Nah, that's right.
You didn't do that.
That is,
I saw
that's
that.
good.
But we did that yesterday.
It wasn't like you called it. Well, you shouldn't have said anything.
Hey, bro.
That was also her.
Nick said you get Prince to get in here, Travis.
I'm calling her more, she's probably here. So, let's see.
So, how many do we need?
One more.
Richie didn't answer his phone, I'm just checking.
I laid out
Here he
just
is.
last night, didn't I?
Hey, Richie, we need one more for a phone.
Of course, it's,
Oh,
I get up so early, it's like,
This
oh,
thing,
it's the middle of the day.
Yeah.
But I hate that. I don't like that, but that's
no.
why.
Oh, so you got that now? Oh,
We'd have to request these specific every time, like if you wanted it.
Right,
It wouldn't go on every bill, but if we requested it, they would.
right.
okay.
And one reason the reason I'm doing this and everything is called.
Yeah, we'll take care of it. Tim.
I'm gonna stick with mayor, that's so pushing everybody trying to,
No, that's
saying
okay.
he's trying to paint his pictures of what SSUT look like and stuff.
Don't worry about it. Take care of it.
Hello, Prince.
I'll talk to her. Call me when you do it.
Which way are you?
Richie will do that thing for us now. Look at you.
In fact, I'm calling Matt Woods right now.
We waiting on, we need one more for,
Commissioners and educators, more all the
you
time.
hear that, all right.
So they can-
See what he said, he's good this week. Very much this sheet.
business.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, that's an old picture. I'm like, what's for this, 87?
yeah, is it there?
No,
Yeah,
it's
it is.
5, 6, 10 years
Oh,
old.
so you're leaving,
I
is
just
it
tried to call
there?
Matt
I
Woods.
sold it.
You can't hurt it, go stomach,
It went
can
straight to voicemail,
You
and
ever
then I just
spend you
texted.
line to get into it? What you couldn't see in there.
So, I mean, no needs to raise it right now.
Richie
Richie
and
can
Richie.
go, Richie can go.
Morning, number 1. Ever seen Tammy? How are you, sir?
You off today?
Grand City, I was waiting.
off today?
No, are you off today?
Is that from Selma?
Tomorrow?
It's been our
Hopefully that's.
understanding.
Yeah.
It's
I
not
hadn't
from
seen you out
Selma,
there
right?
today.
He's where he told me, but they were.
So did I have you?
That's what Richie wanted, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
Cause I got a 9 o'clock.
I do too.
I just assumed that it was that, or it's one
But I don't,
one's of the sell through,
can we discuss a little bit off the
you
record?
know, without.
Well, we can discuss it, we can discuss it, I talked to, and I don't know if he's gonna be, he hasn't shown up yet, Anthony called, like, he may text, I talked to him.
Man, yeah. Well, they need to, because they wore us out on prior to, probably got 100,000 in bill.
They said, yes,
You learned that.
I talked to him this week.
Last year they didn't consider it enough, they won't play much, you know?
Yeah,
But we'll discuss it before.
they did it right this time. Oh, good.
I
She can
think,
discuss it with him.
yeah, Curtis, I just, when I read this bill, I was like, this is cool. Because this, an issue we've got going on right now in Baldwin County is that we've got a county that's, of course, very unique. A lot of it's surrounded by water. And we're having the discussion on if we should go to a city school system. And two areas have gone to city school systems in Baldwin. And what's happened is these kids that are on Ono Island, which sounds very nice to be on Ono Island until you have to travel to school and you go past a city school system in Gulf Shores and have to go all the way to Foley, and it gives you about almost an hour drive. Or if you're on the end of Fort Morgan and you have to drive past the city of Gulf Shores School and drive on into Foley to go to a county school, which is about an hour drive. And the impacts, the way I read this, it says that we'll be studying impacts like school districts. Which from what I understand, if you have more than 5,000 people in a city, you can create a school system, your city school system.
Right.
But what happens is, people try to annex into the city so their child can go to the school, which the city has to create all these city services to take care of those children. So it sounds like it's something that we need to study right now in Baldwin County, concerning what those impacts are for those children. They're living way outside the school district, outside the city.
We're right, but the thing, what I'm doing is just towards bills that are filed, the impact study, so if you file a bill, do that, you can be able to do the impact study to know.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. And it's not, for every, that we, for every bill, but this specific bill, like I said, I'm doing it in reference to the SSUT
Right.
proposed, being taught.
Yeah.
And that way we can be able to,
I read it.
to have information,
Right.
unbiased,
Right.
that points out what, what the actual thing is, rather than, we be given all the information from the city that they're using, they got all dressed up saying, this is how it is, or what is it like that, but does not reflect on, because one of the things I always tell, and this is my allergy to with the city of Tuscaloosa, I got Hale County, Greene County, and Beard County, which are rural counties. All my people have to come to the city of Tuscaloosa to purchase something. None of the money they bring the Tuscaloosa purchase goes back to my rural counties. They keep it all.
Well, I just don't think.
Under the SSUT, my people should buy where they get
I also understand
they
that
buy in those areas, that money share a month. So my rural areas benefit
situation.
from the SSUT taxes, whereas they would lose money. So that's what I said, but we don't have any way to laws to put together, so we need to study,
I know.
if it's proposed, to say, what's the impact, versus, I'm getting all this stuff dressed up by the cities, but they saying hurt them versus wherever, because, to me, part of the argument, the money they lose, it's just money my people are not
Right.
It is, I read that 50 miles.
versus that, so that's why.
And I looked at it in my own personal lens. I was just
Right,
saying,
which
our
is
issues
good.
that we
That's right.
have in Baldwin County right now, we're,
That's right. That
discussing
is the
what does
issue
city
and the
schools
ability
look like all over our county.
outcome.
And we've got such remote areas like the end of Fort Morgan that's covered, you're
That's
around
true.
water and there's nowhere else to go
Yeah.
except internet school.
I mean,
And you're driving past a city school
Way up.
in Gulf Shores or Orange Beach to get to a county school, and it puts that child on the road, or your parents on the road for an hour, or your school bus on the road for an hour there and then an hour back.
Right.
And the same thing down there on Ono, which is kind of part of our
Right.
discussion locally. But if we're trying to say, okay, in the future, if we all go to a county of city school systems, what does that do to the most rural of our students? And do they have the same opportunities when they have to drive past a city school system to get to, something an hour away?
Right.
What does that do? What does your sports look like? What is your, there's a lot of different, and we just can't imagine that child being, stuck over there having to drive past two city school systems to get to the one central county, when we've got a county that's the largest geographical county on this side of the Mississippi. So when I read this bill, I was like, that's exactly what we need. We need to see what the impacts. Would this bill help with something like
Well,
that?
so, to be blunt, I think this
everything that's encompassed by this bill, we would do for you today with or without this bill.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, and we have members who routinely come to us and say, hey, what's the impact of this bill, right? And so, you know, I think yes and no, right? I mean, you know, what I'm hearing is a little bit, is something that I think is different than what this bill addresses. And that's that, you know, oftentimes when somebody is advocating for something, they've hired some outside source who's come in and put together something that's pretty and glossy, and they're using that to sell, right? And we certainly, you know, our members who come to us with that stuff and ask for what's the response, with the right questions to ask, and whatever information we're able to get in, you know, from our realm of sources, for make sure you ask this, make sure have they contemplated this, have they, right? I mean, and usually in the economic development world, what's happening is they're saying, oh yeah, you're gonna give up this known thing, whether it's, you know, income tax, ad valorem tax, or the like, but you're giving it up on the bet that these people are gonna spend more and you're gonna get sales tax, or they're gonna, right, these other impacts to the economy are gonna happen. And that's a system that I would call dynamic modeling, right? And we don't do dynamic modeling, and this bill doesn't contemplate that we would start doing dynamic modeling, right? And that's a conversation we've had as long as I've been, you know, down here. Is you know we believe, and we've always been structured, and of course y'all, we work for y'all, so y'all can change this. But we've always believed that, you know, what we should do is give you the stuff that we know, right? We know it's going to cost this. We know it's going to impact this. We know this is, you know, this is our best estimate of what the magnitude of those things are. And we don't typically go to the higher economist route of, but we hope and guess it might do these other things, right? And as I read this bill, it's still not contemplated that we're going to, you know, that we would get into that dynamic modeling side of the response, if that makes sense. But yes, I mean, certainly, you know, if you came to us and you said, you know, how many people, you know, how many, you know, children are in these pockets, you know, and what is the increased transportation cost? What's the, you know, what's the impact? You know, what can you find out on the impact of participation in extracurricular activities based on geography? You know, we would research all of that and give you, you know, our best, you know, information that we could gather on that, with or without this bill.
Okay.
We would do that.
But this bill gives you 30 days. And look, you know, that puts a timeline on it that I just like, that might be
Sure.
unreasonable, but I guess you could.
Well, I mean, and I think, you know, it gives 30 days. It also has some flexibility in the event that we're unable to meet it, right? And I think, you know, the truth is, and I apologize.
No.
It's okay. I'm just sitting here.
Well, we're not officially.
Okay.
We're talking informally.
Yeah. So I'm not worried about the timelines, mainly because, you know, I could count on way fewer than one hand the number of times that when I've gone to a member and said, hey, here's the challenges we're having and why it's taking us, that somebody's been unreasonable and said, darn it, I want the answer anyway, because that's to their detriment. Because if we give you something that's, you know, that requires a quicker turnaround than us being able to really figure it out, you're not getting as good of information, right? So communication is the key on that. I'm not worried about the timelines or deadlines, because I think we'll work through all of that, right? Now obviously, if, you know, if we pass a bill like this, you know, and over the next year, we go from getting, you know, 40 or 50 requests for this kind of information a year to 500 requests for this information, and I'm going to come back and say, hey, we got to talk about staffing. What we got to talk about? You know, is there a way to rein this back? You know, but I'm not, you know, you know, from the standpoint where we sit today, I'm not worried about that either, right? I mean, I think we do our best for y'all and hopefully give you decent service.
Okay, pause real quick. Matt Woods just sent me a text and said he's in Judy in the Senate.
All right.
He's in the Senate Judicial.
So
He can't make it right now.
Oh, all right.
Okay. Well, I
You get
mean,
somebody-
so do we,
Yeah, he said
I mean, I
it's too many
like
for
the,
Martin.
when I read the bill, I'm like, this is, I kinda felt like we probably could do it anyway, but it's not really called a rural impact.
Sure, right. I mean, to be honest with you, my first response to this bill was, we must not be doing as good a job as we should be about educating members about what we're available for, right? Because I think I'd like to think, I would have hoped members knew that this was the sort of thing we'd do for you anyway,
Sure.
right? But if it helps to formalize it, if it helps to have a more specific structure, if it helps, obviously I'm with or without this now going to try to evangelize a little better too, to make sure members know we're available and what we're here to do. And so I'm taking that to heart, irrespective of how this ends up.
Well, go ahead. We're talking informally, so I think it may give us some time issues here. I mean, we got some other members that's gotta go if we get a quorum, but, so my concern when I read it was the same thing I think y'all were talking about. What I didn't wanna do is trying to do something good, cause a burden on the LSA if some member was unreasonable, or some members were unreasonable. I mean, I think that's not the intent of the bill or anything. I don't want anybody to be able to take advantage of, well, I'll tell you what, I want one of these on every bill that's filed. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if somebody had some kind of animosity for some reason, that they could do that. And if we had it in the code, then does that present an issue? Or do we need some kind of guardrail? But I think from what you're explaining, you feel pretty comfortable.
I do, and listen, I feel pretty comfortable that if we had a situation like that, that's the sort of thing that we'd be able to address with leadership and figure out a path out, irrespective of, whether the statute was there or not.
But I know that myself on, just a handful of times when I've needed something similar to this, that LSA's provided it. To me.
Yes, sir.
Of course, I didn't ask them for a certain time frame or anything. I need this to make it, it'd be like when I was trying to come up with a bill. I wanted to see if it was really what I thought it was, situation. So I know they've been very good, LSA, they're very good to do that.
No. Yes.
So.
What are your thoughts on that, Travis? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it, like I said, it's just, because I heard I said, I wanted to deal with a rule, just
Right.
back to a rule there, which, and I'm in one of those areas, so when you look at it, just from the city versus the rural, because I represent just a tad of the city, all my areas is rural. So, particularly, like I said, I'm doing it in not necessarily, but the SSUT is one of those things that you push, it's being pushed at the expense. And for me, even like I said, I know you don't do it, I would just say, we have an ability to debate and say,
Good morning.
this is what, when they come up, that we become, and you say, you got to me, to have a form, so we don't get that. I don't see it being every bill, I just see,
All right, we'll call the meeting then to order. We will try to be as quick as we can. We know other people have got meetings. Let me say a quick prayer for us. Well, thank you for this opportunity to serve. Thank you for these members and what they do for their district and state of Alabama. Please give us wisdom as we move forward in Jesus' name. Clerk, call the roll.
Representative Sandridge.
Here.
Representative Horton. Representative Chestnut.
Here.
Representative Fiddler.
Here.
Representative Hammond.
Here.
Representative Jones. Representative Moore. Representative Ring.
Here.
Representative Underwood.
I'm here.
Representative Wood. Representative Woods. We have a quorum.
Okay, call the first bill, please.
House Bill 402.
Okay, Representative Travis, I know we've been kind of discussing it, Representative informally, but Representative Chestnut's just arrived, so you can briefly explain.
all right. Thank you, Committee, this morning for considering my bill and everything. And like I said, this bill is just a formal process in which we've been in some discussion where we would ask, the LSA just to be able to do a real impact study on certain bills, and that's I was talking, one of the things that's driving my issues dealing with the simplified sales use tax, And I'm dealing with, I'm in an area where the mayor is one of those big teams that's leading this charge, you know, everything, where they said that it does not want to have your impact that what we currently have would benefit industrial areas. And so it would just give us, you know, the opportunity to have agencies, well, we look at it, here where it comes, but here's the impact on the rural area versus, you know, where it exists. So again, it's just one of those things that I was severe trying to move forward, because the county give us that building. And as they said, you know, we got some resources, but it was just a bill to allow us to have that tool available to us.
Okay, before we, ask for questions, Anthony, would you kind of, like to address? I appreciate you
Yes,
taking
sir.
it down here, it's a
Yes,
busy
sir.
time, but, I've asked Anthony to come, and, because from what I mentioned, earlier, you know, was my concern, I just didn't want to set up a situation where there might be abuse of somebody saying, I need to report on everything, any and everything, and overload the system, and you have it in code, and you're in a bind, you know, so could you address that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate you inviting me down to the meeting, and I'll try not to be super duplicative. You know, I certainly understand the desire for this information. You know, my first response when I saw the bill and we prepared the bill was that I felt a little bit badly that maybe we're not doing a good enough job of advertising what we are available for. We work for y'all. I would like to think that if anybody wanted this information, they would have already known that they could come to us and get this kind of information, maybe not labeled exactly the way the bill does. And so we're certainly open and receptive to having a process codified, if that's what the membership thinks makes more sense, to give it a little bit more structure. I do believe we have the resources available to do this within reason. You know, you're right. I mean, if a member ultimately said, you know, I think at the moment we're at about 790 or so bills that have been introduced in this section, and we probably couldn't do 790 rural impact studies in a 30-day window. But you know, I think, you know, I'm also not concerned about that. I mean, in my experience here, the membership's been pretty reasonable in understanding the balancing act of the resources we have available and getting, you know, appropriate responses back out. So I'm glad to answer specific questions, but I did want to underscore that we're already available for this sort of thing, you know, irrespective of what happens over the next handful of days in the legislative session. And I will attempt to do a better job of making sure all 140 members know that as well. And I believe, again, with or without the statute, we'd be able to work through with individual members and leadership an appropriate time frame to respond to this sort of stuff.
Let me ask you this: do you think that the bill is helpful in any way? Maybe, I mean, from what you're explaining, what I could see is maybe being helpful with members knowing.
Yes, I think it's certainly helpful to know that there's kind of the process exists, right? I think in some ways, and I certainly don't mean this, and I don't want to harm the chance of your bill in any form, shape, or fashion, but given how many days we have left too, I mean, I also think maybe it's, you know, one thing to think through is it's better as a rule than in the statute. I mean, I tend to think, you know, kind of as a legislative power purist, that, you know, we pass laws, we're not governed by the laws per se, and I don't mean that as bad as it would sound if somebody took that out of context, right? But the Supreme Court has said pretty routinely, the legislature passes the laws don't bind the legislature. It's the Constitution and the rules that govern our internal process. So, I mean, you know, from a pure kind of purist of our branch of government, I think it probably would make more sense as a rule than a statute, although I'm plenty comfortable with it as a statute. And I think the biggest positive from it would be, you know, hopefully more people would know it is available and that we're here to do that sort of work.
I know we're on a time crunch. Does anybody need to ask questions, or are we ready to move forward, or what do y'all think?
What would we do if you did have a legislature that tried to just harass you? I mean, is there something that could be done, or is that something we would have to do if that came up, or is that something leadership would say, hey, quit doing that?
Yeah, I think so. and this is kind of responsive to your question. I'm very confident, you know, a handful of you were here, but most looking around, I think most weren't when we formed LSA. So just as a quick kind of history lesson, 3 different professional staff organizations of the legislature existed, and in 2017 we combined those 3 into the Legislative Services Agency in an effort to provide y'all better service. I think, you know, to have a more streamlined approach and a better way. You know, prior to that, the fiscal office sometimes drafted bills because they didn't want to tell members no, and the reference service sometimes dabbled in fiscal stuff because they didn't want to tell members no. And I'm very confident, you know, the bodies of the legislature and leadership worked really hard and were very responsive. And it was a very collaborative process by which we created that, right? And so the structure that exists is the Legislative Council, which is the 20 members, you know, 10 members from the House, 10 members of the Senate that govern joint operations of the legislature. That's the group that hires and fires me, or my position. And then every other staff member at LSA reports directly under a structure that you know, and again, I'm just saying this for illustrative purposes. They operate outside of that political framework, right? They're hired and fired by me and my, you know, deputy directors. And so certainly we all recognize we work for the 140 and try to be responsive to the 140, but I've never been in a situation where a member tried to be abusive and we weren't able to work through it and get to the right result. And at the end of the day, the legal framework is such that if you ended up really in a pinch on that, you know, y'all's recourse would be to fire me and you know, replace me with somebody who would do a better job. And again, hopefully it doesn't come to that, right? But that's, you know, we've always been able to work through those situations, and I'm very confident that the backdrop of the law we have that structure how we operate protects that.
All right.
So Representative Travis, after everything you've heard, the only benefit I see is as a body, we are publicly acknowledging our support for rural areas and that we have this tool. What are your thoughts other than that? What are you gaining?
Well, I would like to have it as record, you know, if we could, nothing gets out, because like I said, I think what we're doing, we just codified what each state that is available, so it's not like we can put it in the extra burden on it and everything. It may not get passed, you know, it's a long,
long process.
To the city and stuff like that, but at least, you know, we'll start, you know, when one jury, you know, start with the second step, you know, so, you know, everything, but I appreciate that and, you know, some knowledge that we do have given where things may, because this may be the end of, you know, get convicted, whatever, but, you know, at least I tried, you know, and I got introduced to me.
All right, in the sake of time, do we have a motion? What else thoughts?
I will make the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and ask for a second.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We have any further discussion before we vote? All in favor, favorable report, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, you get a favorable report, and we are adjourned.
That's right.
You got 2 minutes.
I just texted.
I did too.
Okay.